Greetings from the far side of the galaxy. I'm Fuuri, your host with the most, here with a slight change of plans. I know I promised Cthugha, but the Seaside Fashionista might finally be getting a translation, so I'm putting that on hold. Or at least, that was the plan before Life Wonders killed it. Damn. So before we talk about that old one, we're talking about this old one. As always, do be sure to like and subscribe, maybe donate to my Ko-fi or Patreon for cool rewards. And don't forget to leave whichever Housamo hero you want next in the comments. Without further ado, let's get this video started. Today's Housamo hero is the hot-blooded and hard-headed hentai himbo of the Ikebukuro Berserkers, Cthugha. Here's your spoiler warning for Chapter 11 and the Nightglows in the Dark Sky event. Oh, and just for the record, if the thumbnail doesn't have the hentai himbo sticker on it, just know that YouTube forced me to change it. Cthugha is an octopus transient? I don't really know what to call him. He's from the world of the old ones, apparently coming from a star named Fomalhaut. He's a student at Bukuro Academy and a member of the Ikebukuro Berserkers. It's not stated in-game, but through logical deduction we can determine he's actually the Berserkers' number 2 ranker. Makan's the only one above him since his immortality means Cthugha can't beat him even with all of his firepower. We don't know Cthugha's rule or role. In fact, it's never even stated in the story what his sacred artifact is. It's only through the lore and the description of the units that we get any information. His sacred artifact is a sword, and it has the power to burn through just about anything with flames of overwhelming intensity. His artifact does this by converting his emotions into pure, unrelenting power. And that fact alone makes it something that only Cthugha could wield. Normally, the rule that turns emotions into power would kill its user when the emotions come exploding out. But Cthugha is a flame that can reignite itself, bringing him back from oblivion. He's also from the world of the old ones, so he has the power to teleport himself and others anywhere in Tokyo. And from a physical standpoint, he's also stronger than most since his emotions turn into literal power. And because he's from the world of the old ones, his rule works all the time. On one hand, he gets to keep his physical dominance over just about everyone. On the other hand, it also means he's liable to turn into one of those 4th of July mishaps you see on TikTok. The fact that Cthugha tends to explode when riled up is probably his biggest weakness. Because Cthugha, for better but mostly worse, is an idiot. He clearly needs to lay off the weeby bullshit because he seems to think he's an isekai protagonist. Although, to be fair, considering he did get summoned from another world, he kind of is. Granted, that make like half the cast isekai protagonists, and that's not a thought I can cope with, so that goes right into the bin. What's a thought I can cope with? Cthugha's design. Honestly, I really like his design. The red and tan work really well together, especially when mixed in with dashes of purple. Also love the titty shirt and pants, or well, lack thereof. And his t-shirt from his alt art is to die for. If it was merch, I'd buy it. I really like how Life Wonders always makes their old ones stand out in some way. Like using color palettes that aren't really found in nature like blue and purple, or not basing them on any animal at all. It really makes them feel Lovecraftian, and speaking of Lovecraftian, why don't we move on to Cthugha's inspirations? That being the Great Old One and the embodiment of flame, Cthugha. Despite being a Lovecraftian deity, Cthugha was not created by Lovecraft. He was actually invented by writer August Derleth in his short story The House on Kerwin Street. And Cthugha was later expanded upon by John Glaspie in his work The Dark Mirror. These stories are like super hard to find, but I did manage to find an online PDF copy. I'll put a link in the description if you want to read them for yourself. The text describes Cthugha as this giant writhing ball of fire with burning tentacles shooting and jutting off. He makes his home near the star of Fomalhaut, which is a real thing by the way. It's the brightest star in the Pisces constellation, just thought you should know that. Thankfully, Cthugha was bound and sealed away in chains away from his home. Cthugha can only overcome these chains with 2 things. Glaspie's titular Dark Mirror, and in the House on Kerwin Street, the Necronomicon. A thing I talk about in Shiro's Housamo hero video, shameless plug. In his first appearance in the House on Kerwin Street, Cthugha is mentioned mostly in terms of his relation to his peers. Cthugha, Hastur, Cthulhu, and Cthugha were rivals, constantly competing with each other. They and the rest of the Great Old Ones were only united in their hatred for the Outer Gods. Nyarlathotep, No-Dens, and Yog-Sothoth all belong to this faction. The beef Cthugha has with Nyarlathotep is expanded upon in the story The Dweller in Darkness, where an avatar of Cthugha was summoned to fight an avatar of Nyarlathotep. I'm not sure about Housamo's version, but the mythical Cthugha is actually a daddy. He's got one, but potentially two kids. One of them is Afum-Za, an ice elemental rather than fire who created the North Pole. His second, unconfirmed kid is Fathoghua, the leader of the fire vampires. They're called that because when they pass through a person to consume their life, they create a charred, burning corpse in the process. It's not confirmed if Fathoghua and the fire vampires are his kids, but they definitely do work for him. My more astute viewers may already be seeing where Lovecraft's or, well, Darlif's Cthugha intersects with Housamo's. In the myth, Cthugha resembles a sun, literally a misshapen mass of flesh and tentacles. This explains why Cthugha is a hidden octopus boy? Sure, YouTube will let me say that. Cthugha's myth being a burning mass also explains his association with fire and everything it symbolizes. Passion and destruction, two things Cthugha embodies by his emotions turning into a supernova. Even Cthugha's rivalry with the Outer Gods is brought into Housamo. His description even states that the ex-ruler of Aoyama, i.e. Nyarlathotep, tries to avoid him. It even states that he has no desire to meet the Great Old One at Roppongi, i.e. Tsathoghua, just like the Great Old Ones can't stand each other. Now all I need is for them to meet somehow. And remember, No-Dens is an elder god, explaining his relationship to Cthugha in the Nightglows event. Everything else about Cthugha appears to be a direct inspiration of the motif Lifehunters is using for their Old Ones. Likely because all the cool characters from Lovecraft's work tend to not have much personality, Lifehunters had to spice them up. You know how Nyarlathotep is a DJ, Tsathoghua is a NEET, and Azathoth is a gamer? That's because the motif Lifehunters decided to give their Old Ones is media. I suppose the motif is actually a reference to the fact that the Cthulhu mythos isn't actually a myth like Greek mythology. Unlike other mythologies, the Cthulhu mythos isn't a part of any culture, it's a product made to sell pulp fiction, a kind of media. And rather than creating media like Nyarlathotep or Tindalos, or being an avid consumer like Azathoth or Tsathoghua, Cthugha is a character from a piece of media. To sum it up short, he's the overpowered isekai protagonist. He's got the sword and shield, is literally stronger, faster, and better than 90% of the people he meets. I'm definitely going to talk more about this, but I'll save that for the new segment. Right now, we've got to talk about Cthugha's backstory. It begins on Fomalhaut, the lonely star 25 light years away. Cthugha was flames, and the flames were Cthugha, and that's all there ever was. Cthugha's form was indistinguishable from the flames, that was the only thing around him, so that was all he ever knew. And then suddenly, out of the darkness, his name was called. And for the first time, Cthugha was aware of possibilities, of something else, of the loneliness that had always been a part of him. He raced into the darkness across the Rainbow Bridge into Tokyo, only to find himself alone again. With his summoner nowhere to be found, Cthugha was a stray transient. At some point, he found himself entranced in the world of anime, manga, light novels, and all of that other weeby nonsense. He thought of himself as the awesome isekai hero who arrived from another world to make friends and earn fame and glory. But there was one teensy-weensy, itsy-bitsy, very huge problem. He struggles to control his emotions when his rule makes them explode out like a supernova. This sad little fact ended up costing him a place in guild after guild until he came upon Claude and his berserkers. We actually get to see Cthugha being inducted into the berserkers during a flashback in the main quest. It's actually my favorite Cthugha scene, but we'll get into that later. Oh no, wait, we'll get into that right now. Because now it's time for the new segment. In the past, I used to run you through everything this character did in the main story or event or whatever. But that's where the viewer retention dropped off, so I'm switching it out to talk about the writing behind the character. A brief bit of story analysis, if you will. Like I said, I want to take a look at the scene where Cthugha joins the Berserkers because that is by far my favorite Cthugha scene. Mostly because it would have been very easy to make Cthugha boring. After all, he's modeled after an isekai hero. He should be OP in every way, fighting skills only rivaled by his charisma, but it's not. Most of the time we see Cthugha, he's on the verge of tears, if not actually crying. His greatest strength, turning emotions into power, has been flipped on its head, becoming his greatest weakness. His incredible strength is worthless because it can't get him what he wants. In fact, his own explosive power actively gets in the way of that. And that's why I love the scene where he meets Claude, because it reveals that Cthugha doesn't want to be cool or awesome, he just wants to make friends. And Cthugha's personality is so good for driving this point home. That's because he's not actually modeled after an isekai hero, he's modeled after an isekai reader. He dreams about being like the characters he reads about, but he sorely lacks the social and emotional skills. Modeling him after an isekai reader rather than the hero makes him vastly more relatable than he would otherwise be. In fact, he's probably pretty relatable to a lot of us who play Housamo. Moreover, Cthugha's personality goes into what I think is an important lesson to take away. Just as Cthugha may be socially inept, he still has some sort of skill he can capitalize on. His power is his greatest weakness, but also his greatest strength if it can be funneled in the right way with the right people. And so do you. Might make a video talking more about Cthugha, leave a note in the comment section if you want that, but right now we have to talk about his units. The Hentai Himbo was one of the main characters of Chapter 11, so he gets a 3 and 5 star. And thanks to the Nightglows event, he also gets a limited unit. His 3-star is a fire attribute unit, and despite carrying that sword, he's for some goddamn reason a blow type unit. His first skill, Cheater, applies brawn and adamantine when he appears and remove buff whenever he's hit. The first part is fine, but that remove buff, yikes. This game is built around buffs, so the fact that he can lose them isn't good. Hater of Solitude, his second skill gives him 2 to 400 HP at 70% and brawn at 30% after being buffed. What's really notable is the second part of the skill, which removes 1000 HP from allies and 5000 HP from enemies whenever he leaves. The first part of the skill can be ignored, but the second part does make him a niche option for high difficulty quest. His third skill, Boastful Flame, gives him 8 to 16 CP at 70% and adamantine at 30% after being buffed. It always lets him give burn to hit enemies at 80% and then burn to the entire board when he leaves. The buffs are neat, but the burn skill isn't a particularly good one. His final skill, Enraged One, is pretty good for a status resist skill. After being debuffed, he applies rage to himself at 90%, but more importantly, he's immune to fear, dazzle, and depression. I mostly like it for its ability to remove fear because oh my god, that status is annoying. Cthugha's 3-star is exactly what a 3-star should be, a worse version of the 5-star we're moving on to. His 5-star is thankfully a sword unit and also fire attribute. His first skill, Cheat Hero, applies brawn, adamantine, attack, and defense up at 100% whenever he appears. But he does still remove buff after being hit. He's got better buffs than his 3-star, but the removal is still a problem. Next is Solitary Star. After being buffed, he has a 90% chance to give himself 2 to 400 HP. He also has a 30% chance to apply both brawn and adamantine to himself after being hit. And of course, when leaving, he takes away 1000 HP from allies and 10,000 HP from enemies. It's honestly a viable strategy to let him die because that is a lot of damage. Thirdly is Living Flame, and pay attention because this is the most important part. After being buffed, he gains 8 to 16 CP 80% of the time. The other stuff doesn't matter, but just because I have to go through it. After being buffed, he gets defense up at 30% and applies burn to enemies in front and behind the one he hits. And he applies burn in a 3x3 area on miss and burn to everyone on the board when he leaves. It's funny how 90% of his kit doesn't need to exist, but more on that later, we've gotta move on. His final skill, Enraged X Ruler, gives him Rage Plus at 90% after being debuffed. And an attack up for himself at 30% after being buffed, and an immunity to fear, dazzle, and depression. I really want to talk about this one, but we still have his Nightglows unit to go through. The Nightglows event is weird. Like on the level of the Lost Isle duology weird. Like if Life Runners was going to give an event another sequel, it'd be this one. It's less like the usual events and more like an entire alternate universe. It's really good though. Anyway, this unit came about when Cthugha was possessed by Nodin's Night Gaunts. Eventually, he is freed and Cthugha even gets his own ship, but this unit doesn't have that, which bums me out. Nightglows Cthugha is an infernal long-slash unit, and its skills are as follows. Oh, and I'm just calling Conflagration flag because that's way too long of a word. First, Flare Star applies flag strengthening when he appears and always apply a flag to himself and allies in a 2-square diamond radius after moving. This first skill is made even better thanks to the damage boost against flag-affected enemies. Now, only if some other units could get singular skills so good they could basically be an entire unit. His next skill, Shining in Solitude, takes 1 to 2,000 HP from units he hits and 1,000 HP from adjacent allies 90% of the time. And after attacking, he pushes away enemies in a 3-square cone and allies in a 3-square diamond radius 90% of the time. He's also immune to the Craziness status effect, but that status effect is so rare it doesn't really matter. I know that the skill affecting your allies makes the skill worse, but I do like having to take into account more than just your enemies. It makes using Cthugha feel unique, which is something more units could stand to have. His third skill is Rushing Forward, and that name fits because the skill does give Cthugha increased vertical movement. He also resists all forced movement and has an 80% chance to apply oppression to hit units. Honestly, it's a nothing burger of a skill, not too good and not too bad. And finally, Tears of Fire makes him apply Burn in a 3-square cone and apply Archer to himself at 90%. He also gets another attack boost and resistance from all kinds of burn. He didn't need the extra damage, but he has the extra damage and I am not complaining. Starting with his 3-star, it's a perfectly serviceable unit, but I like to use it as a sacrificial pawn for high difficulty quest. That means actual team comp doesn't matter, but do put him in front so we can die even quicker. His 5-star is solid as well, it's just a better version of the 3-star which matches its steeper cost. His limited unit is good, it's just kind of sad that it's completely overshadowed by Nightglows Kurogane on the same banner. Applying Burn and Flag and then slowly moving up the enemy ranks with Long Slash is good, but it's also just kind of slow. Also, that Craziness invulnerability is like the weirdest thing. The only units that can apply it are the Night Gaunts and Arlanthotep indirectly. Why even have it if it's that rare? Nightglows Cthugha can form a pretty good flag team with Tadatomo's 5-star and Zurong. And for 5-star Cthugha, well, if you don't know the power couple, let me explain. Linan Seed applies like 8 different attack buffs to whoever she moves behind. Cthugha gets 16 CP per buff. His CS is also infinite, so just move her behind him and watch everything die. Now that we've gone over his units, let's get to Cthugha's relationship chart. Nodins likes Cthugha for reasons I don't really know. It's probably explained in the Nightglows event, but I guess my translation didn't cover that. And no one dislikes Cthugha, which is weird because Arlanthotep definitely should be there. I mean, his description even says as much. On the flip side, Cthugha likes Makon for 2 reasons. 1. Makon's immortality makes it so that he's one of the few people Cthugha can actually fight. And 2, they're both himbos, so nothing they say goes over each other's heads. And Cthugha dislikes Pollux since, much like him, Pollux is the embodiment of a star, forming a rivalry. Since Cthugha doesn't have a loading screen, here's a fun fact. The title of Cthugha's 5-star is Loneliness 25 light-years away, a direct reference to the star of Fomalhaut being 25 light-years away from Earth. In conclusion, Cthugha good. He's rather interesting from a writing standpoint and definitely one of the strongest additions to Husamo's cast in a while. I give Cthugha Fuuri's official seal of approval. But that doesn't mean people who are into tentacles deserve any rights. Anyways, please like and subscribe and donate to my Patreon and Ko-fi. We have like 0 supporters and that makes me sad. You get neat bonuses like a Discord, your name at the end of every video, and a behind the scenes look. And don't forget to leave whichever transient you want next in the comments either. As always, this is your host Fuuri, signing out.